Good afternoon, everybody. Benjamin Thorpe here, Farm Equipment Magazine. Welcome to our latest webinar in conjunction with the North American Equipment Dealers Association. Today's presenters are Kit McGuire, the Director of Government Affairs, and Eric Wareham, Vice President of Government Affairs at the North American Equipment Dealers Association. Now, before they get started, I have two quick things I need to tell you. So if you look on your screen at the bottom, there is a small Q&A icon. You can submit questions there at any point during the presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, depending on how much time we have, we can answer them in the order that we get them. And we are recording this webinar, and a replay of it will be available to everybody who registered on the Farm Equipment website. So with that, I've got all my stuff out of the way, and I will throw it over to the main event. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on what time zone you're joining us from. This is Kit McGuire, the Director of Government Affairs. And the other presenter here, as Ben said, is Eric Wareham. Eric, you want to give a quick shout out here?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. We got a lot to pack in and walk through on our legislative priorities for 2023.
All right, great. So I'm going to be doing the main kind of voiceover, reading through the slides, and Eric is going to be going into a lot more in depth on a lot of the subjects as we're moving through here. And just to hit on a point that Ben brought up, if you got questions, please put them in the chat at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of our slide deck here, Ben's going to come back on and kind of be the moderator for getting questions out to Eric and I, and we'll do the question and answer at the end of the presentation. So getting right into it here. First, an overview of what we're going to be talking about for today. Of course, right to repair. I don't think that any discussion that Eric and I participate in anymore doesn't involve right to repair. So look back where we are today. Then we'll cover federal legislative priorities, the Farm Bill reauthorization, and the budget and debt ceiling. Then state legislative priorities, sales tax exemption changes, diesel equipment tax. And we're going to be ending with a little bit of our upcoming NADA DC fly-in. So right to repair legislation 2018 to 2021. First off, 2018, we've got kind of a heat map here on the screen. Eric, you have been heavy in the fight here from the beginning. So what are we seeing here in 2018?
Yeah, so Kip, this is kind of the the emergence of the issue. I think it's good to give a context. I do this slide. Some of you may have seen it, but I like to go back to this to give us an idea of the trends that we're seeing. And 2018, well, we only are fitting a couple maps, but we could go back to 2015 and 16 was when it was emerging. By 2018, it was sort of like, all right, this is a real issue. We started seeing a lot of states. It went into the Midwest where you would expect it, into the breadbasket, kind of scattered around there. And then in the sort of big ag states, minus the deep South. And so, we fought this initially. All of these bills that we saw were broad-based bills. Still, a lot of them were broad-based, meaning digital electronic devices defined as everything with a digital component. So from your coffee maker to your watch to an airplane to farm equipment. And at that time, there were no kind of specific bills towards ag. We'll talk about that a little later. It was just sort of this broad-based notion, but it got the idea going and people started to catch on to it. And at that time, the main proponents were like iFixit, that fixes your cell phones. And then this repair.org starts coming up, and but farm bureaus really weren't on it yet. So that was kind of the story in 2018. And then we move on to 2019.
Sorry, a little bit of lag time here. There you go.
No worries. And, we were successful in defeating it, pushing it back, fighting against the bill. We were sort of our industry, became the spearhead against it in some ways. And you could see that it disappeared by 2019. The middle of the country starts to, the bills don't get reintroduced. So we're like, celebrating a little bit, a little premature, cracking the bottle. It did go into some other states that it wasn't previously, came back in a couple, but not many. So mostly it just disappeared. And we're thinking, well, I guess once we defeat it, it won't come back. And so that was kind of the idea in 2019.
But then we hit 2020.
Right. And it starts to, show itself reoccur in states that we had pushed it back and defeated it. Missouri, Oklahoma, and, a couple of those states in the Midwest. It was persistent in North Dakota, Minnesota. You start to see a little bit of a trend where there's, in 2020, we start getting more populist Republicans that are willing to push this, besides just sort of it being a fringe idea and just Democrats. It also becomes a Republican priority. And so that's what we started to see in 2020. And then 21 was a little bit scary because it came back everywhere that it was previously. There's obviously some states on this map that you can see have remained blank. Sort of the Rocky Mountain West remained blank. Idaho, there was, a bit of a battle there for a second, but most of that, moving into the heartland again, it came back with a vengeance. And we started to see a lot of bill sponsors get really vested in the idea of the bill, and still broad-based by and large. But a recurring issue, and this is when I started to wonder if it was going to become my spotted owl, if you will. Being a fourth generation logger from Oregon, anybody knows about the spotted owl? It's something that started in the 80s and they're still fighting about today. So I was getting a little concerned, but we managed to defeat all those bills and nothing passed in 2021.
All right. So then right to repair in 2022. We had 28 states introduce right to repair legislation in 2022. Proponents had paid lobbyists. And Eric, do you want to speak to the significance of the paid lobbyists there?
Yeah. So prior to 2022, all of the other years, the Farm Bureau caught on a little bit, but not really involved, and didn't testify all that much. Just backdoor conversations. So the other folks that were involved, like I said, repair.org, now all of a sudden we have the Public Interest Research Group, PIRG, that gets involved, and they have money. And don't ask me exactly why they're engaged in this and how they get their money, but they started to pay lobbyists in certain states where they saw they had a willing bill sponsor, an engaged bill sponsor. So places like Missouri and a couple other states, they started to engage lobbyists, and that becomes worrisome, because then there's another level of professionalism to the proponents of the bill, and they're working it actively day after day. So made the hurdle a bit higher to jump over.
And in 2022, no off-road equipment bills passed. However, there were several ag-specific bills introduced. And so what was the significance of kind of this breakout of off-road equipment versus ag-specific?
Yep. So, like I said, prior to 22, everything was broad-based. And we started to see the bifurcation of bills into ag specific. There were some that were medical device specific, and then you have some that were started to just be household consumer electronics. But we definitely had several ag specific bills that were introduced in several states. And so when that happens, we have the target on our industry in particular, and it's kind of heightened. You lose not an entire coalition, but you lose the allies that you had in that broad-based bill to kill something, and you're kind of on an island now. And But there's also some benefits to that because I think it sharpened our focus. And by this point, we had sharpened our focus to really talk about the repair landscape. And we can maybe get into that a little bit later.
And the reason for that verbiage on that bullet up top is no off-road equipment bills passed is because New York did adopt the first right to repair legislation. However, there was farm equipment exemption language in there. Eric, do you want to expand on any of that?
Yeah. So in New York, we had, and we'll talk about New York again in a little bit, but the exemption language that we had reflected our coalition, the Illegal Tampering Coalition, of which there's 30 different member organizations that are a part of, Engine Manufacturer Association, all the way to passenger vessels, to landscapers, to farm equipment, and all the associations involved in that. And the language that we've come up with exempts out all of those categories of products that we all share. So that language was used in New York, was adopted. And the significance of that too, partially was that one, it set a precedent that a bill got passed and we were exempted out. And there's a reason for that. And so when other legislators look at that, they I think ponder the rationale behind why we were exempted out. Also created some media about why we were exempted out. So in some ways that was a positive, a whole lot better than us being involved in it.
And then additionally, just to round out our discussion on right to repair in 2022, there were a couple of states here that had interim study hearings, specifically Missouri and North Carolina. We found that these were a better venue for testifying at. I'll let Eric first speak towards Missouri, and then I will cover down on North Carolina.
So generally, when we go to testify on these, anybody who's listening, who's participated, thank you for your participation, but that it's such a pressure cooker and it's tense. And one of the reasons for that is that you're not really, testifying in committee is not a natural conversation by any means. And when there's a lot of contention in these hearings and a lot of people testifying, you generally get limited on your testimony to somewhere 2 to 3 minutes. So you're trying to cram this complex topic with this title right to repair. You're trying to cram in everything you can into a 2-3 minute hearing and coordinate that with who you have there. And you never really get to the meat of it. You never get to the heart of the issue and peel back the layers of the onion so that people understand it. And so these interim study hearings were an opportunity, I think, for dealers in Missouri. Tom Noby and Paul T. Combs were there to testify, and they did just a terrific job in this longer format where they didn't feel that the confines of 2 to 3 minutes. I think they probably had 15 minutes or so, and then the legislators felt I think were liberated to ask questions and expect a long answer instead of yes or no's or setups or gotcha questions. It seemed that just kind of gave the ability to really get at the heart of the issue, and they just did a tremendous job. And Kip, you were in North Carolina. What was your experience there?
Yeah, so in North Carolina, over the last about year, I guess now, the background on this was in the 2022 legislative cycle, North Carolina had a right to repair amendment proposed in their farm bill. They ultimately decided that there was a compromise put up there that they weren't going to pass the amendment as part of the farm bill. However, they wanted to set up these interim study hearings to get more information on the issue. And so after the legislative session during the summer and fall of last year, they held 3 of these interim hearings sessions, which I want to give credit to the North Carolina Chamber, because they really spearheaded kind of mobilizing, getting people there to testify against a legislative fix here. And then within the ag equipment space specifically, Brian Dobson of Quality Equipment was huge for really being able to express dealers issues and kind of be the face of dealers for those study sessions. But yeah, it was a great venue for, you don't necessarily have this time restraint of trying to talk about this. This is one of the big things that Eric and I often talk about whenever you're going in and testifying on a bill or legislation, is you're trying to unpack this multi-layered issue in a very short, usually like 3 to 5 minute span. And that just gets very difficult. And so in North Carolina specifically, they at first they opened it up just to kind of public comments. That got a little bit unwieldy for them. And so in their last session, which I did attend, they had specific people that they invited to come and testify as kind of their key witnesses. Brian Dobson, again, was one of those people. And so he and one other dealer were given about 30 minutes, I want to say. I think each one of them had 15 minutes allotted to them to really kind of talk about the issue and walk the legislators through what right to repair meant to dealers and what the possible ramifications of it could be. So it was fantastic. I mean, as far as being a true kind of knowledge seeking endeavor, I think the interim study hearings were far better than what public comment or testimony on legislation has been.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. And so that's kind of our wrap on 2022. So moving into 2023 now, what we're seeing right now, which Eric and I are just in the middle of the throes with this. We literally an hour ago got off of a call with the coalition that Eric had mentioned earlier, discussing all this. And so right now we've got 43 bills introduced in 19 states. And I think on our call that we just got off of, there was a couple of new bills that have popped up. So I think that's a little bit closer to 50 bills at this point in time.
Yeah.
Bills fall into several categories: broad-based consumer electronic bills, wheelchairs, New York cleanup bills, motor vehicle, and ag specific. Eric, do you want to hit any specific of these? I know that we talked about going into the ag specifics. Do you want to hit anything else along the way?
Yeah, I would just to provide the context. So the broad-based bills, again, are anything that has a digital, depends on its operating for a digital electronic device that depends on its operating a digital component to it. So that's kind of everything under the sun. And then these consumer electronic bills, those are the ones that list out, your laptop, your smartphone, tablets. And, there is a slight concern that if farm equipment incorporates a computer, would our equipment and our products be incorporated because they have that as a component to it? And that doesn't seem to be the case. And in some of those states, we do have exemption language. So that's good. Wheelchairs. You guys might all be wondering, why are you talking about wheelchair bills? The interesting note there is that in Colorado, which is one of the states where I was in yesterday, talking about right to repair for ag equipment. Last year, they passed a bill for right to repair for wheelchairs. And that's kind of a hard issue for people to fight against and may not want to. But there seems to be a trend with the proponents of right to repair that we've seen that across the country in recent years, getting these wheelchair bills passed and then coming behind it and amending on ag equipment. And that seems to be a strategy, a tactic. And so we're monitoring those just to, recognize that's kind of what they're pivoting to, because they can't just they can't get past farm right to repair by itself. Excuse me. And then there's the New York cleanup bills. There's two there. That's because the governor of New York, after the right to repair bill was passed, the governor had some amendments that they wanted to include so that it could get her signature. And so that's going through the process right now. And then motor vehicle. And the reason this is interesting and it's somewhat worrisome is that Massachusetts was that's where the right to repair movement, the genesis of it came from. And it was motor vehicles clear back in 2012. So we're talking 11 years ago now. And motor vehicle industry was the first to come up with an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, And that sort of has carved out motor vehicles from all the right to repair legislation that we've seen over the years. They're revisiting it. There was a ballot measure some of you may be familiar with there's an injunction against it right now while it's going through federal litigation. But the gist of it is that the state has introduced this motor vehicle right to repair legislation, even though there's an MOU. So it's, that's just kind of worrisome. And then we have our ag specific. And so, Kip, we have 11 states with ag specific bills. I think we could run through a few of those just to talk about kind of the status of those or just talking about them more generally.
Yeah, so I'll run through a couple that we're honestly not overly concerned about right now, and then we can kind of focus in on a couple that are upcoming that we do have are a little more active with, right? And so we've got one in Texas, which is HB 515. It sounds like it's not too much of a worry at this point in time. Then we've got a Missouri House Bill 698. Again, we've kind of a reintroduction, a lot of similar or a lot of the same players that we've seen in the past, but I don't think that it's a huge worry at this point in time. There was one bill in Vermont, House Bill 81, which sounds like it is deferred. So I don't think that's going to be going anyplace at this point in time. And then Montana House Bill 475. And again, all of these are ag specific right to repair bills. But by the sounds of it, the Montana bill probably isn't going to be going anyplace either. So that, moving on from there, we'll focus in on some of the bills that we are definitely keeping a closer eye on and being a lot more active on. So let's start with Colorado because you've got some recent activity there. So Colorado House Bill 231011. And I'll just turn it over, Eric. Do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, so there, they had a House bill. This, again, followed a wheelchair bill last year. The same sponsor of that wheelchair bill brought forward an ag-specific bill. And to my knowledge, is not involved in the agriculture industry, not a farmer or producer. And, I was actually in the Capitol yesterday. We were talking about this bill with the Senate side because the House side, there is a Democratic supermajority, and the bill is kind of, I wouldn't say sailing through, but it's moving. And so the Senate side is where we're kind of taking a stand, and I think we have a good foothold there. There's a lot of misinformation about what the bill does. So we're meeting with a lot of the commodity groups to discuss with them, what the implications of the bill would be, and their eyes are kind of getting open to that. And so that's an active bill that we're working pretty hard. And I will say too, I should add that we had a great dealer turnout, and that makes all the difference in the world. So we had several dealers there yesterday. If any of you were on the call, thanks for joining. It was a good day. And just having that presence of dealers in the Capitol, wandering around, getting introduced on the Senate floor, talking to legislators, pulling them off the committees to have a chat with them, that makes a world of difference. And I will say, just generally speaking, I always say that, one dealer is worth 10 of me, and having dealers in the room to discuss this makes all the difference.
Absolutely. And I think that, just going back to the interim study sessions that we were talking about there, you really saw that play out where the dealers were the ones that were invited to come and testify for a greater amount of time. And it really had high dividends in those states. But so back to a couple of the bills that we're paying attention to actively here. We just covered Colorado. There are two in Florida right now. It's a House and Senate kind of sister bills. So they both have the same language, just in the different chambers. So in the House bill is 533 and the Senate bill 422. Again, ag specific. And the coalition that Eric was alluding to earlier has sent letters to the committees that would hear these bills, as well as the sponsors, kind of stating what our position is. And right now, there's not too much activity to do on these, but we are watching them because they're supposed to be scheduled for committee hearings in coming weeks, and so we expect these to be active. Eric, do you have anything on Florida there, or do you want me to just move on?
Yeah, let's move to next.
All right. So next, we've got Maryland House Bill 712. This one we are going to be very active on. It's got a committee hearing for next week scheduled, which we are going to be at in person. And I believe there are going to be several dealers there. And so if you already signed up for that, thank you very much, along with several other representatives from the industry. Eric, do you have anything else on Maryland?
No, I mean, Kip's taking point on this and doing a great job, and working with the manufacturers as well. And it sounds like you got to get it on the record. Every state has its own nuances, and so things can move quick in some places. But it sounds like Maryland, there's a rational process, but you have to show up and you have to make your arguments and get it stopped.
Yeah, and so with that, I guess I will add the caveat that if you are a Maryland-based dealer and you haven't signed up for that, please come and join us. We can use all the support, and as Eric has pointed out several times, hearing from the dealers and the constituents there that actually have some skin in the game makes all the difference. With that being said, though, we will move on to, I believe, our last bill of interest right now, which is in Minnesota, 1337. And Eric, I'm just going to hand this one over to you again because I've not been very involved on that one.
Yeah, and to be honest, the credit goes to Matthew Larsgaard, who actually just killed the bill in South Dakota pretty handily. He's got a fight on his hands in Minnesota. And actually that's a broad-based bill. And so, manufacturers are heavily involved. There's a lot of manufacturing there. So actually the call we were just on, we got an update, and it sounds like, again, there's just a lot of work to be done. It's an uphill battle. And, but I think I feel better about it after the call we had than I did this morning. So, it's just continued engagement, continued keeping up the pressure, and letting people know what our perspective is.
Perfect. And I fibbed a little bit there. I apologize. We're not quite done with current bills here. So we've also got one in West Virginia, House Bill 3384, which from what I understand doesn't sound like it's going to be moving, but it does sound like the Senate might be bringing a bill forward to try and get this issue to move in West Virginia. But that is all in the workings, but behind closed doors right now. So there's nothing necessarily solid there. Did we miss any place that you want to discuss here, Eric?
I don't think so. I think we've covered the map. I would just say that this year, it's certainly, you can tell that there's a lot of ag specific bills. And you start seeing that bifurcation of breaking it up into household consumer electronics, agriculture, wheelchairs. It's sort of targeting different industries, because I think the proponents realize that if you have it broad based, there's just that many more people allied against it. And so they're starting to get really specific in how they run these bills. We're also seeing the same bill sponsors repeatedly over and over and over, who, despite failing several years in a row, continue to reintroduce this. And it's frustrating. It's become a bad penny, but we're keeping it up. And I think that every year we do this, more and more legislators around the capitals start to say, that's just a bad bill. You've tried it. You've had your hearings. Everyone's had their voice heard. It's just a bad idea. It's not something that continues to kind of gain traction every year. In some places that's the case, but it seems that we have a good track record of stopping this, and hopefully that continues.
So the moral of the story, everyone, is that we still have hope.
That's right.
And I do want to just throw out as an aside here real quick, I've seen a couple of extra participants jump in. And so if you've just joined us or joined us since Ben started out with the introductions, Please note that at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box that you can put questions in there, and Ben will be the moderator at the end of the slide deck here, and we'll try to get to your questions. I apologize. One more bullet here on this slide. 3 states contain exemption language. Eric, do you want to hit those?
Yeah. So real quick, this is a good indicator that we're making progress. So correct me if I'm wrong, Kip, but the 3 states with exemption language: Oklahoma, Oregon, Delaware. Am I missing one? Those are the 3.
I mean, New York from last year, and I believe that all 3 of those are based off of the same exemption language that was in the New York bill from last year, correct?
Right, that's correct. So that's a good sign when we start seeing that with other bills. And then there's actually Washington that is just household consumer electronics, and so there's a lot of these bills that, even though they don't have an exemption, they've moved on from agriculture. And once that sort of happens, it seems like the same in Oregon. I guess I should say there's an exemption in Oregon as well. So yeah, a couple more than 3. It's just kind of a fluid situation, obviously, that's fast developing, and we're in the thick of it.
Perfect. And and there's our exemption language right there. I'm going to leave that up on the screen just so that you can read through it if you want. I'll read through it just to get the audio going. So this was, again, what was is codified in the New York exemption language and what would currently be in those other 3 states that Eric has already mentioned. And so it says, nothing in this bill shall apply to a manufacturer, distributor, importer, or dealer of any off-road, non-road equipment, including but not limited to farm and utility tractors, forestry equipment, construction equipment, mining equipment, and tools, technology, attachments, accessory components, and repair parts for any of the foregoing.
Yeah, it's pretty comprehensive. It covers us and also other members in our illegal tampering coalition. So, this has become the template that we want to incorporate into all of the other states. And so I think we're doing a good job of that. And we have some signaling from legislators that they are willing to accept this and follow New York's the path that they've paved.
Perfect. And federal right to repair in 2022, I apologize. We've got 2 more slides, I think, on right to repair here. Stay with us, and we've got other things to talk about, I promise. But Eric, so on the federal right to repair, real quick, in 2022, we had 2 Senate bills, Senate versions 3549 and 3830. One was by Senator Tester of Montana, and the other was by multiple people here, Loomis and Waden. Do you want to talk about specifically any of the interests here?
Yeah, so real quick, the ag specific bill, John Tester from Montana kind of did this as a constituent bill. It was referred to committee, never had a hearing. And for those of you who don't know, John Tester he is the only working farmer in the Senate, has a farm up by Big Sandy, Montana. And he hasn't introduced it yet again. So I don't know what we're going to see there. The other bill, broad-based, the interesting part about this shows the political dynamics of this issue, right to repair. You have Loomis, who's from Wyoming, who's one of the probably most conservative members of the Senate. And you have Ron Wyden from Oregon, who's considered probably one of the most progressive senators in the Senate. And they both co-sponsored this bill. So that's what makes it a little bit worrisome. But again, that didn't go anywhere and did not receive a hearing.
All right. And House versions 6566, broad-based medical devices, and 6570, motor vehicles. And I'll let you cover down on the interesting point at the bottom there with GT Thompson.
Yeah, so, these bills, again, didn't receive hearing, didn't move, but we were concerned to see GT Thompson. For those of you that follow federal politics, you know that GT is from Pennsylvania, Republican. He's also now the chair of the House Ag Committee. So the fact that he has the motivation to sign on to a motor vehicle right to repair, we were concerned that that motivation could transfer over to ag. And we'll talk a little bit more about our approach with him later.
Perfect. The U.S. House Committee on Small Business Subcommittee on Underserved Agricultural and Rural Development They had the first official right to repair hearing last fall. I believe it was in September, if my memory serves correctly. There we go. So the hearing title is Right to Repair and What It Means for Entrepreneurs. And again, the significance here is that this was really the first hearing at the federal level for right to repair that we've seen. National security concerns loomed large. And so I sat in on this hearing and got to hear the discussion and the comments. And the real big takeaway, I think, for me was the national security concerns that came up. And specifically, the chair of the subcommittee, he started out very, very pro right to repair. You could kind of tell that he'd invited one of the key witnesses from his home district was a farmer, an organic farmer that he had asked to come in and explain to the subcommittee why right to repair was important to him. But as the proponents and industry kind of had this conversation and started answering questions, you could even see in the chairman's mind that there were real issues here. And one of the dots that he connected was this national security issue and the importance of intellectual property rights. And so it was an interesting point, I think, for both Eric and I, because you don't see this argument come up at the state level. But once this gets elevated to the national level, you just kind of see the expanded impact of the issue.
Yeah, Chip, we had not to interject, but we have as a bullet the conviction of a Chinese national for economic espionage. This actually occurred in Missouri, where source code for an ag software was targeted, and that individual was sentenced to 7 or 9 years in prison in Missouri. But correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it the chairman of the committee that brought this up?
Yeah, and that was kind of what I was alluding to. Is you saw this progression in the chairman's outlook on right to repair, right? Where at the beginning he's very, very pro, right to repair. This is an issue that we need to move forward. We need legislation on it. But then as he heard the arguments and the questions or the answers of questions from proponents, he really started kind of shifting his mind and seeing that there were holes in this, specifically with this national security concerns in there. And he brought, I think he brought this up, and he also mentioned the next bullet there, the National Security Commission report on artificial intelligence. Which he said that everybody on the subcommittee and really everybody in the room, especially the committee members, needed to read that because there's an entire chapter in it on the national security implications of intellectual property rights and why the U.S. needs to expend more time on bolstering those, not degrading them. And so it was just, like I say, a very interesting dynamic to see kind of emerge from this right to repair issue at the federal level versus what we usually see at the state level.
Yeah, that's right.
So federal right to repair in 2023, we've got one bill right now that is live, HR 906. This is pertaining to motor vehicles. Primary sponsor is Rep. Neil Dunn, and it is bipartisan. It does have 2 Republican sponsors and 2 Democrats. Eric, do you want to expand on anything there?
Oh, just real quick that I think it's early in the new Congress, and so we might see some other ones come up, but certainly the early introduction, we're watching this, and the bipartisan effort here is somewhat of concern. But given the complexion of Congress and how closely or divided they are, it's not I don't expect a lot of movement from really much of any legislation, let alone right to repair.
All right, great. And I believe no ag specific right to repair bills yet. Canada right to repair 2022, Bill C-244. And Eric, I'm just going to let you kind of address the rest of this because you were actually there on the ground with a couple of other NADA staff. So,
So yeah, the bill was introduced to address consumer appliances and electronics, but it was so broadly written that it applied to everything. Really kind of taking an axe where a scalpel was needed, if you will. And it started to move kind of quick past second reading, October 8th, referred to the Industry and Technology Committee. There was a hearing that was scheduled on November 14th, and myself and John Schmeiser attended that hearing. John, credit goes to him because he did most of the heavy lifting in that hearing. And it was really important because we had the conservative MPs there who were concerned about ag. And so they brought that into the picture. And I think that John's testimony really swayed their perspective on it and saw what kind of the implications were. And they've stepped way back from that. So since that hearing hasn't moved, there's been subsequent hearings, but the bill has not moved. And so we'll keep everyone updated on the progress of that.
Perfect. And I think that is a wrap on our legislative side of right to repair here. And we covered all of that in only 37 minutes. So if you want to quantify the importance that we're having to place on this issue versus the time of the webinar here, that might be an indicator. But so moving on here, repair done right, supporting your repair. Eric, you really spearheaded this, kind of branded it. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, and I'm not going to spend too much time because we got some things to get to yet. We're getting short, but I would say that just as a refresher, we did a webinar on this a couple months back. You can look at that. But Repair Done Right's just our industry, and if you want to flip to the next slide, our branded manufacturer, branded training for dealer personnel to get aware of right to repair, all things that are available. We see constantly in talking with legislators that there's just a lack of awareness about what is available. There's still farmers telling legislators, I can't get a manual. And we know that's nonsense, but we as an industry just need to have the awareness. So we have this training and testing, working with the manufacturers. And on the next slide, I think there's actually a sign up. You can go to that QR code and log in, and we walk you through how to get signed up for that. So encourage you to do that. It kind of fills the gap in between. We obviously have the John Deere MOU, but there's still sort of, beyond the MOU, what is the implementation of all of the things that we say we're going to do. And we need to live up to that as dealers, and as our industry, we need to live up to what we say we're going to do. And I think we do a great job of that, but we just need more awareness, with our customers. And that comes from interactions with our dealer personnel. And so they need to be aware of the good story we have, and that's Repair Done Right. We have a great story to tell with how much we do to serve customers and make repair available to them, self-repair.
Perfect. Yeah. And this issue really came out in a couple of those interim study sessions too, where people were talking about, this isn't necessarily a issue of the fact that the fix isn't already out there. It's just trying to educate both dealership staff and end users of being able to kind of connect up and know where to find those fixes. And so this is an attempt to help get that education going. Federal priorities. So we finally get to talk about some of our priorities outside of right to repair. Farm Bill reauthorization is happening this year. It's a once every 5-year reauthorization. I'm sure that most everybody on this is very familiar with it. But this is a House and Senate Ag Committee selected and convened, or I apologize, the House and Senate Ag Committees have been selected and convened. There's a little bit of a lag, obviously, in the House side, especially at the beginning here with the confusion on speaker and just trying to get to that. I have been going to the Hill about once a week for the last month and a half now. And just to be actually in the Capitol and kind of see what the ramifications of that slow process are continuing to have is amazing. So just let me tell you, it's a real thing, and it has wide ripples. But so moving on here, the Senate Ag hearing. the Senate did have an ag hearing last week or week before last. Eric, you will probably be able to give me the exact date on that. But so a couple of things they talked about here was the farm production cost estimate, which is 460 billion. And then Title I price loss coverage requires significant decline from kicking in. And Eric, you really know a lot more about this than I do, so I'll kind of let you talk to the significance of that.
Well, obviously, we all know that input prices are up 460 billion. Cost estimates, that's a record by far. And, it plays into this Title I price loss coverage that they talked about the Senate Ag hearing. And the example they gave was that at current prices, corn prices would need to decrease 46% before payments kick in. And the significance of that is that when you have prices way up, that's a long ways to go down before you get Title I price loss coverage. So there was a lot of bipartisan support for increasing the safety net in that first hearing that, was kind of the kickoff to, I guess, the Farm Bill reauthorization. It's framing the debate right now is what they're doing and trying to narrow in on what they're going to do. And that just becomes more important because we'll talk about a little bit the budget in just a second and the kind of the restrictions that they're going to be facing. But and I'll just kind of keep rolling, Kip, here. The House Ag Committee, they have not had an actual hearing. They convened, but they actually had a listening tour. Their first hearing is scheduled in early March. So they just were at the World Ag Expo in Tulare, California. The significance of that is McCarthy was there with G.T. Thompson and several others of the House Ag Committee. And there was kind of his first comments on the Farm Bill, which is kind of the only must-pass legislation besides the debt ceiling. But this is the must-pass legislation that I think is probably the only major piece that we're going to see move through Congress this year. And so his comments were closely watched, and he didn't say much, didn't give away much, but so we'll start seeing how they're going to frame the debate in early March. And to your point, Kip, that's pretty late because we started to think that they were going to have hearings much earlier, but they're behind.
Yeah, and just a little bit of detail on Speaker McCarthy's comments that Eric alluded to there. The analysis of his comments were that he's trying to be very bipartisan and play to the fact that, as Eric said, this is a must-pass piece of legislation. But similarly to the conflict that we saw with some of the Freedom Caucus and some further right individuals in Congress trying to leverage a little bit more decisions going their way, there's some concern that they might try to leverage the Farm Bill as a point of leverage against the debt ceiling as a bargaining chip. And so Speaker McCarthy was really trying to paint this as a bipartisan thing, and that's not going to get in the way. But there's definitely concerns that the Freedom Caucus members are going to try to hold up the Farm Bill as a bargaining chip against the debt ceiling, which is our next bullet point. So budget and debt ceiling intertwined. The president's budget submission expected by March 9th, and the House budget resolution sometime in April. Eric, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, just in the quick time we have, going back to the Farm Bill, I just saw today the USDA released some of their preliminary estimates. The nutrition assistance portion of the Farm Bill this year is expected to be 86%. That's a 10% increase over 5 years ago. So the Farm Bill portion keeps getting narrower and narrower. And when we have this debt ceiling and the budget intertwined, we're actually seeing a decrease now, expected decrease in total government revenues. And so, you have all that combined, that the sort of land of plenty and free spending is kind of winding down. And we had a lot of direct payments that contributed to all-time high net farm incomes. That's not really going to continue. I don't think that we're going to see that, despite what people want, there is going to have to be some, some log rolling and to get people on side to get this passed. But just knowing that it's a must pass, I think they're going to be able to get that, but it will have to be bipartisan. But, a lot of those people, again, from the Freedom Caucus type, hardcore conservative element of the party, they want to peel back some of the SNAP benefits. But GT Thompson has already made statements that he's just not going to allow that. He's not going to entertain those. And that, trying to keep that alliance together of nutrition assistance with, farm safety net and get it passed together. So we'll see. It's going to be a big showdown, and I think it's going to get a little messy, just from what we saw from the speaker battle. So we'll stay tuned.
All right. On our second to last slide here, state priorities, sales tax exemption expansion. I'm not going to read through every single one of these here. Eric, do you have any specifics that you want to hit on, though?
I think the big thing is to know that sales tax exemptions in the states, there's just been a lot of activity around it. So we've seen, exemptions for tires, exemptions for all-terrain vehicles. The interesting one in Wyoming, exemption on the state tax on repairs to farm equipment. That's failed now. And so we're just watching all of these. I think it's we haven't really seen much in the past, but it's something worth noting. Nothing specific to the sales tax exemption for farm equipment, except for the next bullet point, which goes in the opposite direction, which is the diesel equipment tax in Oregon, of all places. HB 3158, they want to impose a 1.5% tax on the sale and lease of diesel equipment for the privilege of doing business in the state. And so that's pretty wild because, as everyone knows, almost every state in the country that has a sales tax exempts farm equipment from it. Oregon is singling out farm equipment for a tax, obviously, because they oppose diesel and heavy duty equipment. So that's something that we're fighting. There was a hearing on it yesterday. Doesn't look like that bill's going to go anywhere. There's a strong coalition against it. So we're just starting to see a lot of activity around this, and we're keeping an eye on it.
Perfect. And our last slide before we spend a few minutes here on question and answer. The NADA DC fly-in for 2023. This is going to be the first DC fly-in that NADA will be hosting since its formal stand-up in July of last year. So our dates are on the screen there. It's going to be held March 28th through 30th. The actual day of the fly-in is going to be the 29th. And we have, I think, a pretty nice itinerary set out, a little fun mixed in with a lot of business. We're going to start out on the 28th with a reception at the Old Ebbitt Grill, which I'm not sure how many people are familiar with that, but it's a very illustrious spot in DC, kind of a must see if you're doing tour stuff in DC to get brunch or have cocktails there. So we're going to start out with a cocktail reception at Old Ebbitt Grill on the evening of the 28th. On the 30th, we're going to do a stand-up breakfast at the hotel that we are staying at. And then we're going to have a solid block of time with legislators throughout the morning and again in the afternoon. Right now, I think that we've got 5 or 6 either blocks slated for seeing legislators and or their staff. We're also going to be having lunch that day. This is March 29th at the Capitol Hill Club. And our guest speaker is the chair of the House Ag Committee, GT Thompson. And Eric, do you want to kind of tying back into a bullet that you had spoken about earlier on his being a proponent or being a co-sponsor of the automotive right to repair in Congress? You kind of want to speak to that real quick?
Yeah, it's a huge gift for us, and kudos to you, Kip, and some of the dealers that have helped us bring him in. When a legislator sees a fly-in, dealers come out and they actually come to speak to us at an event. We want to have a great turnout and show them that we're there in force, and he can have that personal connection with our industry. It's those one-on-one communications with those legislators that make all the difference in understanding or that decision that he makes to sign on to a bill or not. And so since he's shown an interest in right to repair, we definitely want to head off any interest in right to repair for farm equipment. So having him be a speaker at one of our events on our Hill Day is a terrific get. So we hope you're able to join us. We do have limited space, so please sign up soon. And then Kip, he can talk a little bit more about the event we built in on the 30th before we fly out.
Yeah, so on the 30th, we just kind of wanted to add a historic ag tie-in there, and so the morning of the 30th, we're going to load up on buses and head down about 12 miles south of the Capitol in Northern Virginia to historic Mount Vernon, George Washington's estate. We're going to have a nice private breakfast down there before doing a couple of hours of just touring his estate, and I don't know if we're going to be going through the mansion, but yeah, just a great location. I live about 3 miles north of it, and it's fantastic. Whenever you start getting into his thoughts and trying to advance agriculture in the late 1700s there, it really is fascinating. So we thought that might be a fun way to end our DC trip. So like Eric said, love to have everybody join us if you're able to. The more the merrier. And we really need people to start signing up as far out as possible, just for the fact that I'm going to the Capitol, like I say, about once a week right now. And a large portion of my time there is trying to lock in meetings with legislators that you are constituents for. And so if you want an opportunity to sit down with your either representative or senator, please sign up. We'll get your name on the list, and I will go and try to set up some meetings so that we can get in front of your legislators. With that being said, pending anything that Eric has, I will turn this over to Ben if there are any questions from the audience.
And you're leaving us perfect amount of time here at the end to answer some questions. And as a quick reminder to anybody who has a burning question here at the end, feel free to pop it in at the bottom and we'll try to get to it. But I will move now to a couple questions that came in leading up to today's webinar. One of them being for you gentlemen, if right to repair does go away in the end, what is the next priority NADA would like to focus on for dealers?
This is Eric's dream situation, that right to repair goes away and he can focus on something else. So Eric, what's
That's right.
What's your dream of being able to do outside of right to repair?
Oh gosh. Well, our core competency as an association is dealer statutes. We certainly want to make sure those are updated and reflect current industry trends that govern the agreements between dealers and manufacturers. So that's part of it. And then workforce development. That's actually a tie into right to repair. Workforce development challenges are huge, as we all know, and so we'd like to focus on that more. And basically anything other than right to repair, I'd be happy with at this point. You could sick me on trying to get local municipalities to get your more funding for dog catchers, and I'd be more excited about that. So that's kind of where we are right now. But there's a host of issues that we have for priorities that we can help dealers out with.
All right. And another question we got was for dealers who are wondering how they can help, what do you think are the top actions they can take to help fight against right to repair legislation?
Just show up. As we've mentioned throughout this, the dealers make the difference. And so having your voice heard is the key to this. When we have those legislative alerts that come out to you, and you have the opportunity, I don't think you should shy away from it. If you can take time away from the business, it's well worth your while. So as we continue to have this threat against the industry, it's just important to show up and have legislators understand how it's going to impact your business and your customers and your community and your employees. So that all is tied in, and they need to hear from you. So engage with the association, and hopefully we see you in the future.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and just say 100% everything that Eric just said. We talk about those interim studies again, and the difference that it makes for legislators to be hearing it from somebody who is a constituent of theirs, who employs several constituents of theirs, who, is part of the economy that affects multiple other of their constituents. If you look at it purely from a political standpoint, that's how they probably start doing that calculus. And it adds up to a lot more weight than a random lobbyist from out of state coming in and talking to them, despite the fact that whenever Eric and I show up, we have the weight of all of the dealers who are within the association. The political calculus for them just is a lot more impactful if it's coming from a dealer who is one of all of those things. And the other thing that I want to point out real quick too is that repair done right training. Something that we've seen come up a couple of times was dealers talk about they've been ambushed by, somebody will call the dealership and get somebody that was just recently hired on the sales counter or something like that, and might not know that something's available. And so that person just gets that answer. And then next thing you know, that's coming out in testimony someplace or in a news story someplace that, so-and-so called to try and get this piece of equipment and it wasn't available or doesn't exist. When in fact it does exist. It was just a lapse in that specific person knowing where to find that answer. And so again, kind of tying this into that repair done right, is really trying to proactively go out there and ensure that no dealers are having that problem and helping get the staff spun up as best they can to help on a purely non-legislative issue.
All right. And if you guys could stick around for a little bit longer, we had one more. We had someone ask about the Deere Farm Bureau Memorandum of Understanding, and they asked how we can argue against right to repair legislation that's only codifying that Memorandum of Understanding.
So a couple ways. One is that the MOU, does it is very different than most of the legislation that we're seeing. The template legislation we have, for one, has no sideboards on access to embedded software for preventing modifications and protecting intellectual property. The other is that the MOU differs drastically from legislation, and that legislation, the provisions retaining to dealers selling parts at net cost, that is not part of the MOU. And so those are two things, substantive right there. But bigger picture is, even if they were to pare it all down, I give the hypothetical, and I just talked to a legislator yesterday about this, that go back 20 years, and if there was legislation mandating some type of right to repair on farm equipment 20 years ago, that would be completely obsolete today. And just with all the tremendous amount of technology put into the field and all the changes. So, when you start to legislate and mandate things, that's the problem. They become outdated, outmoded, and you constantly have to go back and revise it. And that's a sure sign that legislation is not the right fix, that the market is the right way to handle those situations. So, and that does resonate really well. And so I don't know if Kip has anything else to add to that.
Yeah, so I'll throw into this is something that Eric and I talk a lot about, but we haven't had a chance to or a need to get really in depth anyplace else about the intellectual property rights and the copyright here, right? Is in the MOU they kind of allude to that they're going to make some exceptions to allowing access to digital locks for repair purposes. And so there's been a couple of arguments come up from legislators saying, well, we're just going to, again, that verbiage, we're just going to codify that. But there's inherently a difference between two private organizations coming together, one of them being the property owner or the copyright holder of that information and saying, I'm willingly going to turn this over to you under just a mutual agreement, versus a state coming in and saying, you have to turn that over, right? And so the point there being that if you're trying, or if a state decides they're going to codify something that is in that MOU, especially pertaining to the copyright portion of that, is probably going to be preempted by federal law. My understanding there, Eric. I believe that's your take too, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, and then you're going to have a patchwork agreement. The MOU creates a national agreement with a national framework that's workable, and there's a continuing dialogue there between the major primary stakeholders in this issue. And whereas state legislation, you could have just a patchwork, of all different states, all different legislation that would be really difficult to comply with, and also doesn't have that continuing dialogue to reassess and make sure that we're doing what's in the best interest of our dealers and their customers.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for today. So I want to remind everybody again that the presentation and audio will be available on the website. If you want to go back and review it at any time, you can watch your email for the Farm Equipment newsletter for more on that. But with that, on behalf of Kip and Eric and the North American Equipment Dealers Association, as well as Farm Equipment, I want to thank you for joining us today. Please feel free to reach out to me or anybody else on the staff if you have thoughts on the event today or any topics you'd like us to cover in future webinars. We'd love to hear about it. And I just want to thank our two presenters again for keeping us all educated on the issues in the industry. So thank you, everybody, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day.